Hello, my name is Fox, and today I'm going to be examining a work called Witchcraft and Magic in Europe, Volume 5, the 18th and 19th century. The work in question is copyrighted, so I will be doing all of this under the Fair Use Act for the purpose of education and research. A lot of the reason I've chosen this work to examine is that it's published by the University of Pennsylvania, first of all. And it affirms a lot of the things that I say, which aren't exactly common knowledge. As far as common knowledge goes, most people know about the witch burnings, and they know about the Crusades. They don't know very much about them, and they only know about the witch burnings due to a popular book that's mandatory reading in some high schools for some strange reason. That book is called The Crucible, and were it not for The Crucible, most people today probably wouldn't know the witch burnings even happened. Even though they didn't happen that long ago, and it's really terrible what happened there, it would have been wiped from the memory of humanity, and due to the power that the Church, that the Vatican has. So anyway, getting into the book here, we look at Chapter 2, called The Enlightenment Crusade. And I'll read you a little bit here. Introduction. The debunking of witchcraft, possession, and all such frauds and follies was central to the Ecrases. I'm sorry, my French is terrible. All my foreign language pronunciation is terrible, so you're just going to have to bear with me here. Ecrases l'infamie, crusade of the radical enlightenment, spearheading emancipation on a broad front, of science from superstition, progress from prejudice. Now, I'm not sure if they're stating that ironically or not, because the fact of the matter is, today in America, 64% of the population, their minds are ruled by superstition. Now I'm talking about the 64% Christian majority that we have here. Self-proclaimed Christians. And science is occultism. So, trying to turn occultism into science by, quote, debunking all such frauds and follies, that just tells me that either the people who wrote this, or the people who record it in history, or the people who were in charge of dreaming up the Enlightenment movement didn't understand what occultism was, and they thought it was a lot of hocus pocus. Occultism, as some of you might know, the word occult means hidden from the eye. Oc means eye, and cult means hidden, obscured. Next paragraph. For Voltaire and his allies, the propaganda war on witchcraft and magic had a quite specific enemy, Roman Catholicism, for the Church was the mother of superstition. Well, isn't that interesting? You've got a kind of three-way battle going here between the rational minds, the Roman Catholics, and the witches. Every expose they made of any folly, be it animal cults in ancient Egypt or the oracles of Greece, could and would be read by those in the know as a veiled attack upon the Church. Well, wait a minute, why? Why is it a veiled attack upon the Church? The Church had been going after, quote, animal cults and oracles since its inception. I think what they're trying to say here is that the Church was stupid and retarded, and that it believed that these people actually had power, and that there was a real reason for going after them. I think they're saying that these people had no power, that all of it was hocus pocus, and so the Church never really had a reason to go after them. There is no question that there is power in the occult, and in witchcraft, and in magical workings. There's no question about it. And anybody who would go so far as to question the idea that there's power in it hasn't looked at even 1% of the evidence that's available. For if they did, they would find too much to throw out on reasonable doubt. I can tell you right now, and you might think this is silly, but it is what it is. Alright, when I first moved into this house, I hung a pentagram up on the front porch where nobody could easily reach it and rip it down. It's been hanging there for the last 4 years. And, you know, there's a lot of obnoxious and ignorant people in this town that do a lot of different things, trespass and such, litter. I don't have any problem here. Now, you're hanging a pentagram up like that, and it's more or less a decorative object, it's not a ritual object. You're hanging it up as a symbol of protection. Like an actual working protective object. You might say it has a force field. Or you might say that the very idea that it's hanging there and people see it is effective in convincing them that this is the wrong place to litter or trespass or do whatever else that they're not supposed to be doing. That if they really have it in them to go and do that, maybe there's a better house in town to do it. And so, a lot of people, and I would agree with them, would say that a pentagram hung up like that is a symbol of protection. And it has protected my house. Right? So little things like that. And there are tons of little examples like that. And then there's some really big things. Some really big things. And I personally have seen some, and I know a lot of people have seen some. In terms of playing around with magic and witchcraft and the results that you get and the side effects, quote unquote, that you get. And we're not even yet getting into the vast amount of evidence, claims, testimonies, what have you, from the paranormal. From the paranormal research body, I guess you could say. All the various ghost stories, all the legends of haunted places, all the UFO sightings, all the... look at it this way. If you are into the occult, if you went somewhere, like if you're wandering around the woods and you found this old dilapidated structure and you went inside, and there was like ritual objects all over the place in this abandoned rotting house, and there was like a pentagram painted on the floor, and you didn't know anything about the occult, first thing you'd do is you'd get the hell out of there. I know I would. Now that I do know about the occult, I'd still probably get the hell out of there. If any place is reputed to be haunted by a demon that wasn't properly exorcised after a ritual, if people won't go in there. People will steer clear of it, and they'll talk to each other about it like there's a serial killer in there or something. So you can't say that this is all superstition. I mean, in today's day, a lot of the people that I'm talking about don't have strong Christian or Catholic ties. This is all purely, they're worried about something invading their body and making them go crazy. That's literally what they're worried about. They're worried about being possessed. And not because they saw, what's her name in The Exorcist with her head spinning around and pea soup flying out of her mouth. That's not the reason. The reason is because they have experienced minor possessions before of, wandering spirits that try to take control of their mind, and on a subconscious level, they recognize the need to psychically defend themselves, and they do it all the time, regardless of whether or not they have any involvement in the occult arts or magic. They're having to do psychic defense all the time, and they recognize that possession is a very real thing. And the thing about some demons, and even lesser demons, is that if they don't like you, and they want to trick you, they want to take a long time to do it, to get you to bend to their will, they can do that. They can set on you, and they can take a long time to work their way into your psyche. And one day they will have you in their service. So when people hear that a place is haunted by a demon, or that Satanists live there or something like that, they tend to steer clear of it, and it's not because they believe that they're going to go to hell just by walking there. Nobody believes that. Nobody believes that shit. Okay. The reason that they will steer clear from such a place is very real. It's very pragmatic. We're not talking about overly superstitious people. We're talking about people that, aren't easily frightened. They've seen enough horror movies, and it's the modern day. People aren't like they were even 70 years ago in terms of superstition and being generally frightful of the world. People are pretty bold and pretty brave. Or stupid. Or all three. Anyway, back to the book. Voltaire and the Philosophes. "What is magic?" asked Voltaire, answering briskly, "It is the secret of doing what nature cannot do. It is an impossible thing." 25 of the 600 articles in his philosophical dictionary dealt with it, while many others touched upon it, and his Essai de Moires and other writings turn over the question. Voltaire was, or affected to be, outraged about the evils resulting from such mumbo-jumbo, observing that superstition is immediately after the plague the most horrible flail which can inflict mankind. There are still sorcerers within 6 leagues of me, on the frontiers of Franche-Comté, at St. Cloud's, quote, Libby, 1935, 208. That's a footnote. "Men come in 2 sorts," he bantered, "knaves and fools, and the former had always cheated the latter. Hardly surprisingly, since so endemic were credulity, fear, and the spellbinding mystique of the marvelous that the crudest hoaxes worked." So Voltaire says that magic is doing what nature cannot do. I think that what we're calling magic is how nature itself was created, and how everything else came into existence. And in fact, modern science would more or less back me up on that. Not exactly like that, but I can take several claims which modern science makes and demonstrate to you that they're absurd. And in demonstrating that, I'll show you how they're actually agreeing with me in a contrarian way. For instance, how did the Big Bang happen and how are stars created? Both reputedly a point of gravity. A point of gravity that either spontaneously wound up where it was, or was the result of clouds of gas hanging around. Yeah, that's right. Clouds of gas hanging around in a vacuum created such gravity that it pulled in everything around it. And the more things it pulled in, the more insatiable the hunger of the gravity was. And it pulled in so much stuff that it all went supercritical and turned into a nuclear explosion. That's basically what they say. Now, there's so much to that you can't affirm with experiments on Earth. You can't replicate these claims with experiments on Earth. That it'd be easier to just say that, well, as funny as this is going to sound, it'd be easier to just say that the Bible is easier to understand than the claims made by modern science, in that the Bible claims that in the beginning was Word. Word is what? Word can be a thought. Word can be spoken. Word is still word if it's still a thought. And thoughts are what become magic after will and determination is put behind them. In the world of mankind and all its technological contrivances, even something like a hut, a shack, a fire, doesn't get constructed, doesn't get made without first thinking about it. First becomes a word in the mind. So the Bible says, and I wouldn't doubt that they lifted this from some ancient pagans. The Bible says that in the beginning was Word. And that actually makes more sense than what modern science claims was in the beginning. Even when it comes to the primordial sludge or primordial pool, whatever that thing is they call, the ancient sludge from which everything arose, from which the first microbes arose and became all the other creatures. I'm talking about the theory of evolution. They're claiming that something popped out of nothing, that amino acids popped out of inorganic chemicals and became proteins and then cells, and then they began replicating, right? And for no reason at all, just decided to happen on its own, right? And nobody intended this. No supernatural deity intended this at all. It just happened. And not only did it happen, we've got, hairless monkeys standing up right now, painting pictures and constructing huge buildings, and this all began with a amino acid emerging from the primordial sludge and becoming a protein, becoming a cell, becoming a tissue. That's what they claim. And when you really get into that, the person inclined toward ignorance and who really doesn't have a great capacity for deep thinking, that's easy for them to believe. The person who does have a capacity for deep thought can't believe that for very long. They have to put it down. They can't think about it all the time or it'll drive them nuts because it's absurd. They're not only claiming that things popped out of nowhere, but they're claiming that they popped out of nowhere for no reason at all, that nobody willed it. They claim the universe basically popped out of nowhere, that stars pop out of nowhere, that biological creatures pop out of nowhere, that our thoughts pop out of nowhere. Our thoughts aren't shared, they aren't common, they aren't telepathically transmitted or anything like that. They are the result of chemical reactions in our brain. That's what they're claiming. I don't know about you. I've never seen something living rising up from the inorganic realm and taking form in the world and going on about its business. Never seen anything like that. Never heard of anything like that. I have heard of magic working. I have heard of supernatural this and that. I have heard of UFOs. I've heard all sorts of crazy claims from all sorts of people who didn't profit in the least in terms of social recognition by making the claims that they did, made themselves further isolated and lonelier. So it looks like the overtone in this book here that I've got, as they're going into chapter 2 with Voltaire and this and that, they're not discounting Voltaire. They're not saying that Voltaire was a retard, that he was no better than the religious people he was up against. They're saying, they're just quoting him. They're telling you what he believed, and they're not going contrary to it at all. They're not critiquing his beliefs. So, is this another attempt at intellectual sterility? Is this the old rational purity spiral? I don't know. But I would be very surprised to find that the people who put this book together are actually sympathetic toward witchcraft and magic and actually give it the rational stake that it deserves, that allow it to have legitimacy as it should. This next part is great because this next part is going to reveal just how stupid and how intellectually limited Voltaire is. How had it arisen? Voltaire often alluded to the Asiatic origin of all absurdity. The Jews then passed it on quote, they were especially given to magic because it is the height of human extravagance. And finally, the church fathers promoted it. Alright, so let's stop right there. I wasn't aware that the Norse and the Celts were Asiatic. I didn't know that they descended from Asians. And I don't know how he would have known that back then, how he could have possibly known that back then, even if it were true. No, the Norse and the Celts did not descend from Asians. And the Norse and the Celts believed in magic, believed in the supernatural. The Norse and the Celts were not intellectually sterile, rational purity spiralers. So, Voltaire either has no knowledge of the Norse and the Celts and their traditions, or he's unwilling to admit that they existed. Continuing on with the book, Voltaire said little of magic in the Middle Ages. Yeah, maybe that's because at his time there was too much damn surviving evidence of it that people could throw in his face. So he didn't go there because he didn't want to bring it up. He didn't want people going to wherever, finding the text and bringing them out and showing them to Voltaire. Like, look, you're saying all these people are lying? And that would have been hard to argue against. That would have likely been the end of his credibility in his career there. Back to the book. He traced the Renaissance flowering of the occult in the writings of Pico della Mirandola and others, and in the Reformation too, for the Protestants acknowledged demonic possession, thaumaturgy, and sorcery, as did Bodin and other intellectuals who, quote, should have known better. Should have known better, huh? Hence, witch and heretic burnings spread. The worst of the matter, he contended, was that, quote, all the people, seeing that magistrates in the church were believers in magic, were all the more invincibly persuaded of his existence. As a result, the more sorcerers were prosecuted, the more appeared. From whence came so general and so unhappy an error? From ignorance. So this is what I was just talking about. The fact that the church made a big deal about it led to more people getting into it. Because why would the church be going after something that was illegitimate and didn't work, right? And the church had been doing that since its inception. It had been at religious war with the pagans, the magicians, and the sorcerers, right? And they'd gone on, and then here comes the quote-unquote rational age, right? With Voltaire and Descartes and these guys. And they're willing to throw most of human history, as we know it, on the ground and piss on it and tell you that you're nuts and you're crazy and anyone who believes like you is nuts and crazy and that they're the only ones that are right. It's actually worse than the Catholic doctrine. It's worse, if you really think about it. It's a very dangerous trajectory that they're taking. Because, think of it this way. What if someone said to you that your thoughts were only chemical reactions, and so if you pay any attention to your thoughts at all, you are delving into hallucinations. And so, like the average person pays attention to their thoughts all day long, the average person has no idea how to make their mind silent. So for the entire time that their mind is not silent, they're being told that they are delving into mere hallucinations, since thoughts have no ultimate reality beyond the chemical reactions in our brain. And so, what if they wanted to criminalize this hallucination? Like, put it this way. If you get a psychiatric examination nowadays and you say the wrong things, you're going to be committed. You don't have to do the wrong things. All you have to do is say the wrong things, and you'll be committed. So the precedent for that is there. Now, what if the rules were changed, and you admitting that you believe that your thoughts have validity could get you locked up? You see where this is going? Do you see where the rational purity spiraling becomes dangerous? And that's what I'm up against here. That's why I do the work that I do. Because the fact of the matter is, folks, psychiatry today is telling people that if they believe in a religious or a spiritual deity, and they speak with that deity inside their head, they are in fact schizophrenic and or delusional. And they tell people that their religion and spirituality is entirely contrived and has no validity beyond what they believe. It's not alive. And that if they believe they're speaking with a deity or a demon or anything else inside their head and it's talking to them, that they are schizophrenic and or delusional. Now, to me, it sounds like you're about halfway to finding yourself involuntarily committed. And if you slip up and you say that you believe it would be okay to harm somebody for the right reason, you're going to be in there. Such obsession with witches was a blot on the human race. For Voltaire, witch trials were high on the list of those judicial murders which tyranny, fanaticism, or even error or weakness have committed with the sword of justice. Well, wait a minute. He's saying that the sword of Catholic justice, or Protestant justice, or Christian justice, or whatever, that did these, quote, judicial murders, he's saying that's wrong, but then he just got done saying in that paragraph before that they're basically all psychopaths and they're all schizophrenics and delusionals. He inspired the modern day witch hunts as they are. What we have to deal with nowadays in terms of the witch hunt still going on, I'll talk about that in a bit, was inspired by people like him. And at the same time, he's condemning the church for doing real witch hunting, physical witch hunting, with fire and swords. Isn't that ironic? Isn't that just ironic? And bear in mind, folks, that the ideas that Voltaire pushed didn't have to be enforced over time at the point of a sword. Nobody had to put a gun to anybody's head to get them to believe it. They accepted it willingly and carried it on to this day and even developed it so that modern psychiatry takes such platitudinal positions as this to call people schizophrenics and delusionals for believing what they believe. So I'm going to skip ahead here and read something else. On the occult arts, verdicts varied. And again, I'm wondering what position the writers of this Witchcraft and Magic in Europe, Volume 5, are taking on this. Because they're just quoting what people believed. They're not taking any sort of bias here. Alchemy got considerable coverage and a crumb of sympathy. Yet, while not condemned out of hand, it leant too much toward the hermetic and failed the test of modern empiricism. Alright, well, I'm going to cut this one off here. I basically summed up the first part of the second chapter in what was discussed here. They go into specifics here, and I'm going to research some of these names that they've listed in here. And I'm sure I'll dig up a whole bunch of information that I wouldn't have ordinarily run into. But before I close, I'd like to introduce a hypothesis here. So if you go back to the story of Enki and Enlil, one wanted mankind to be free, the other one didn't. They fought over it. In order for mankind to be free, he has to have knowledge that allows him to live apart from the animals. So he has to have technology. He has to be able to develop technology. So the gods assist him in developing technology. And that ties in with the Prometheus myth too, where Prometheus is giving man fire. Fire, of course, is the beginning of all technology. As technology seems to flourish from man's hands as a matter of almost natural consequence, just as soon as he comes out of the cave and is separated from the wild beasts of the night and the chill night air. So you have these old stories, and there are a few of them, of two creator entities, one that wanted man to be free and the other one that didn't. And like all surviving mythology, I have to look at it as an intellectually honest person. I have to look at it and find what validity I can find in it, because there is validity. The question is, where is it? How does it apply? That's what I'm after. So I recognize, in some sense, that these are valid without knowing anything. But then, as I learn about history, I find themes in all of history. And this is one of them. So the church comes to power, and we see this theme take hold where, obviously, the entity that didn't want man to be free creates the church and goes around smashing up all of Europe and trying to make men not free, destroying technology and trying to prevent it from coming into the common man's hands and interrupting every natural mechanism that ordinarily would govern human life, technology or not. So the church is like Enlil manifest. And it goes on and it goes on. And somewhere around the 16th century, I think the spirit of Enlil behind the church is getting the impression that this way that he's been doing things is not going to be able to continue and still be effective. That it has to transform to become as effective as it once was. And people aren't afraid anymore. They aren't afraid enough. So the spirit of Enlil backs off and begins to recalculate what he's going to do here. Reformulate his plan. And he comes up with the rationalist movement. And he more or less starts taking his stock, selling his stock that he has in the church. And you'll notice that around that time, the church really starts to fall into decline and lose a lot of its power. And I do believe that Enlil was behind it, in that it was a pretty good stab, a pretty good effort on his part, because it continued even to this day, where we have psychiatrists making the ridiculous claims that they do, putting themselves on a high and mighty pedestal above all of humanity. So the field of psychiatry basically replaced the church's influence in respect to how the church affected, well, pagans, doers of magic and sorcery. Both of them ridicule and savagely attack believers in the paranormal and the supernatural every chance they get. And they will never back down from their positions, no matter how much evidence you put in front of their face. Alright, I'll end that there. Thanks for listening, and have a good evening.